Pablo Neruda. He is arguably one of the most famous poets of all time. He has many controversies surrounding him as well, but are these based in reality or simply one of the many consequences that come with his fame? Let's delve into the mind of a poet, a politician, and a romantic to uncover just what it is that makes him so renowned, in addition to his darker past. Welcome to Poets in Red, Part 1. First off, Neruda won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1971. His major works include The Heights of Machu Picchu, Walking Around, Sonnet 17, Poema 20, and Ode to My Socks. Today, we have a special guest talking about his experiences with Neruda. Hi, and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here. Poets in Red, is it? What's that about?
Well, it's a good color, no? I wanted it to feel dangerous and mysterious.
Is that really the reason? Kind of dumb.
Well, I guess the red could also represent Neruda's communistic ideologies. Anyways, I'd like to ask you a few questions.
Ask away.
Tell me about Neruda. What kind of person was he? Did you know he would be where he is today?
Dead?
No, I mean his career and legacy.
Oh, well, to be fair, it all came as a surprise. Not that he wasn't talented or bright, but I always thought his goals were unrealistic. He was a visionary, to be sure. We both grew up poor, but I remember he had a mentor growing up named Gabriela Mistral. He saw promise in him and gave him books to encourage his talent. Neruda had to sell everything he had just to publish anything. Remember it like it was yesterday, him yelling through the streets to me with the paper in his hand.
His first published works? Crepusculario en 20 poemas de amor y una canción desesperada, I believe.
Those are the ones.
Can you tell me about how he came into politics?
Before he was a politician, I can't say he was all too concerned with politics. He was always chasing women and writing poems about that.
Really? What do you think led him down that path?
Well, he started associating with other poets, including Federico. I think they tainted his mindset. Most poets are more liberal, and associating with them definitely bled into his own work.
Were you around him much at that time?
I can't say I was beside him the entire time, but I made sure to see what he was up to every now and again in the papers.
I see. Tell me, what do you feel Neruda has to offer that most poets lack? How does his poetry make you feel?
As a proud Chilean, I appreciate how he puts his country in perspective. Also, Spanish poetry sounds much better now, much easier on the tongue, how it blends into itself. English is much harsher, with the harsh syllables and the pauses. Español como un idioma es mejor que inglés porque suena mejor.
Sorry, could you repeat that for our English listeners?
No.
Understandable. You seem to be anti-communist. You say Federico Lorca, the famous author who wrote Bloodwedding, might have tainted Neruda with his ideologies?
Well, communism did nothing good for either of them. Look what happened to Lorca. Executed, shot. What does that tell you about how I feel? Neruda worshipped Stalin, Batista, and Castro, and heavily criticized the U.S. capitalistic policy. After the Banana Republic, I can't say I blame him. U.S. companies have tormented South America for centuries, paying dictators for land and control while exploiting workers. The Banana Republic, for example, he wrote a poem about it, comparing those dictators to flies who find nourishment in the rot of their countries.
That's a good segue. Let's delve into Neruda's poetry. I have today his poem, Walking Around. Sucede que me canso de ser hombre. Sucede que entro en las sastrerías y en los cines, marchito, impenetrable, como un cisne de fieltro, navegando en un agua de origen y ceniza. El olor de las peluquerías me hace llorar a gritos. Solo quiero un descanso de piedras o de lana. Solo quiero no ver establecimientos ni jardines, ni mercaderías, ni anteojos, ni ascensores. Sucede que me canso de mis pies y mis uñas y mi pelo y mi sombra. Sucede que me canso de ser hombre. Sin embargo, sería delicioso asustar a un notario con un lirio cortado, o dar muerte a una monja con un golpe de oreja. Sería bello ir por las calles con un cuchillo verde y dando gritos hasta morir de frío. No quiero seguir siendo raíz en las tinieblas, vacilante, extendido, tiritando de sueño, hacia abajo, en las tapias mojadas de la tierra, absorbiendo y pensando, comiendo cada día. No quiero para mí tantas desgracias. No quiero continuar de raíz y de tumba, de subterráneo solo, de bodega con muertos adheridos, muriéndome de pena. Por eso el día lunes arde como el petróleo, cuando me ve llegar con mi cara de cárcel y aúlla en su transcurso como una rueda herida, y da pasos de sangre caliente hacia la noche, y me empuja a ciertos rincones, a ciertas casas húmedas, a hospitales donde los huesos salen por la ventana, a ciertas zapaterías con olor a vinagre, a calles espantosas como grietas. Hay pájaros de color de azufre y horribles intestinos colgados de las puertas de las casas que odio. Hay dentaduras olvidadas en una cafetera. Hay espejos que debieran haber llorar de vergüenza y espanto. Hay paraguas en todas partes y venenos y ombligos. Yo paseo con calma, con ojos, con zapatos, con furia, con olvido. Paso, cruzo oficinas y tiendas de ortopedia y patios donde hay ropas colgadas de un alambre, calzoncillos, toallas y camisas que lloran lentas lágrimas sucias. Walking Around has been translated to English by Robert Bly. It so happens I am sick of being a man, and it happens that I walk into tailor shops and movie houses, dried up, waterproof, like a swan made of felt, steering my way in a water of wombs and ashes. The smell of barber shops makes me break into hoarse sobs. The only thing I want is to lie still, like stones or wool. The only thing I want is to see no more stores, no gardens, no more goods, no spectacles, no elevators. It so happens that I am sick of my feet and my nails, and my hair and my shadow. It so happens I am sick of being a man. Still, it would be marvelous to terrify a law clerk with a cut lily, or kill a nun with a blow on the ear. It would be great to go through the streets with a green knife, letting out yells until I died of the cold. I don't want to go on being a root in the dark, insecure, stretched out, shivering with sleep, going on down into the moist guts of the earth, taking in and thinking, eating every day. I don't want so much misery. I don't want to go on as a root and a tomb, alone under the ground, a warehouse with corpses, half frozen, dying of grief. That's why Monday, when it sees me coming, with my convict face, blazes up like gasoline, and it howls on its way like a wounded wheel, and leaves tracks full of warm blood leading toward the night, and it pushes me into certain corners, into some moist houses, into hospitals where the bones fly out the window, into shoe shops that smell like vinegar, and certain streets hideous as cracks in the skin. There are sulphur-colored birds and hideous intestines hanging over the doors of houses that I hate, and there are false teeth forgotten in a coffee pot. There are mirrors that ought to have wept from shame and terror. There are umbrellas everywhere, and venoms and umbilical cords. I stroll along serenely, with my eyes, my shoes, my rage, forgetting everything. I walk by, going through office buildings and orthopedic shops, and courtyards with washing hanging from the line, underwear, towels and shirts from which slow, dirty tears are falling. Walking Around has strong motifs of aimlessness and a sense of unbelonging, implied firstly in the name. He isn't dead set on a certain location, he's just walking around, wandering. He finds himself among wombs and ashes, which are clear symbols of beginnings and endings, and wishing that he could wander the streets like a delinquent with a green knife. Now, in Spanish, the color green has a malicious connotation. So, instead of a green knife, he means a knife wielded with malicious purposes. Before he describes the green knife, He mentions his daydreams of killing a nun and terrifying a law clerk. He seems to want to defy both law and religion, which are ancient institutions pre-established before his time that governed and continue to govern man. Why upset these institutions? Well, as he claimed before, he is sick of just being a man who is ruled by these institutions. He wants to break out from them and become more than a man, and more than a blind follower. Though it is physically impossible for a man to become more than a man, he says that he is waterproof and dried out in the waters of wombs and ashes. He is impermeable to these beginnings and endings of a cyclical nature. Now, with these claims, it seems to be saying that he is above life and above death, and tired of being only a man, that he wishes to be a god of sorts. However, he then states that he would like to be like a stone or wool, to lie still. He is tired of man-made surroundings and tired of his own human assets, such as his hair and his nails. He wants to be something inanimate and lifeless. Then he goes into the knife and upsetting predisposed establishments. Still, it would be nice. He goes on. He couldn't do these things as a stone or wool, so he is then acknowledging the benefits of being a man and contradicting himself earlier in the poem. Neruda often uses the symbol of roots in his poetry, as they often align with the themes. Roots have different meanings. They can be tendrils at the bottom of plants, and they can be the ancestry one carries with them. Neruda poses roots with a negative light because they are buried under the earth, providing nourishment for the plant above. He does not want to be buried and stifled like a corpse in a tomb. He then segues from corpses to Monday, and he says, rather than acknowledging Monday, Monday will see him with his convict face, meaning though he will not give half a thought to the day, he will make himself present and known in his insolence. He then describes the atrocities alongside him as he walks, though he ignores them and continues serenely. There are intestines, umbilical cords, bones, and many such body parts displayed. Lastly, he describes clothing being hung out, but these too are tainted in dirty tears. The body parts are not just physical cruelties, just ones hidden. The clothes are cleaned, but what they experienced is not erased, because the body underneath is still crying. The entire town is one of roots, because it supports something larger above it. They are corpses waiting under an unlawful government, one of tyranny and misconduct. Now, that's just how I read it. What do you think of it?
I think he's being a bit dramatic here. I'm not really sure why he wants to be stone or wool or cries at barbershops. Honestly, I quite enjoy them. I can see it going into the dictatorship, but without the context, I don't think I ever would have come to that conclusion.
Do you think context is important for poetry?
Of course, always. Poets like to use symbology, metaphors, similes, and whatever other fancy wordplay they like. Usually it's not historical details they focus on. They focus on the feelings of the time and the greater meaning, so it would be hard to pinpoint a historic event unless they called it by name, which would be simpler to do, but if I know anything about poets, it's that they hate simplicity.
I agree. Context is usually important. Another bit of context we need to focus on is the translation. It's a bit harder to comprehend poetry that's been translated. It leads to a lot of questions, like how much can we trust things in translation? What is lost in the text? Who is qualified to translate it? Are they a poet in themselves? Can they truly convey all the meaning the original author intended? What do you think of the issues that come with translation?
Well, knowing Spanish and English, it's obvious the differences between them, that is. However, the translators, I say, are definitely qualified for their work. The changes they make might make the wording different between them, but they only do these things so the message is preserved, which is far more important, in my opinion.
Would you say it's a better experience to read Neruda's poetry in its original language?
It definitely seems closer to the poet, as in you experience it as it was written. There can be a certain disconnect, I'd say.
Let's get to the main question on everyone's mind now that we've covered translation. Neruda has been known to be a romantic. Has he ever taken this too far?
He has confessed a few things to me. I suppose I'll talk about them since they're already made public. He was enamored with a maid in Cleon when she declined his advances. She took her wrist and led her to his bedroom. Her eyes were wide open the whole time, and she was unresponsive.
Neruda told you about this?
Yes, and concluded to say that he doesn't blame her resentment of him. Did you hear about the airport?
I did. Will they rename it after Neruda?
Many feminist movements are rallying against it, saying there's no need to rename Chile's biggest airport. They also claim this is a very bad time for the renaming, since women have just begun to come out against their abusers.
Obviously, in today's climate, this is a horrible thing. Back then, how would it have been perceived?
Well, it had been a thing in 1929 when he was stationed in Cleon as a diplomat. Well, I mean, rape was never a good thing. I wouldn't say it was acceptable back then, but it's definitely more frequent. The awareness and Me Too and whatnot has definitely helped, statistically speaking.
Would you say that Neruda's work shouldn't be enjoyed, knowing what he's done?
In my opinion, no work shouldn't be read based on what the author has done. However, a reader must have that sort of lens. They need to read it from an objective perspective, knowing what the author has done, but also accepting that just as that person has done horrible things, they also have done good things and are capable of portraying positive messages.
I have to say, that's quite the food for thought. Sadly, we're out of time for this episode. Thank you for joining us.
It wasn't a pleasure.
Well then, today's episode of Poets in Red is brought to you by Poets.org, The Guardian, All Poetry, and PIT Journal. Also, a special thanks to the old man for talking about his childhood relationship with the poet. Thank you. See you next time.